Welcome to the second episode in a Legendarium series about the witch trials. In part 2, The Burning Begins, we will talk about how lawmakers in the century following the publication of Malleus Maleficarum, or the Witch's Hammer, wrote witchcraft laws for dozens of kingdoms. These laws would be put to terrible effect in the 1500s during the Weisensteig and Trier witch trials. Generations of scholars and attorneys who read Kramer's work put witch hunting into law. In 1532, Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire published Constitutio Criminalis Carolina, which pronounced death upon anyone practicing harmful witchcraft. 10 years later, a parliament under King Henry VIII made witchcraft a secular crime in the appropriately named Witchcraft Act. During 1552, Ivan the Terrible of Russia issued the aptly named Decree of 1552, which pronounced witch trials to be civil matters, not church proceedings. As witch trials escalated going into the 17th century, practices described in the Malleus Maleficarum went into practice. Officials began their hunts by posting notices on church doors, urging townspeople to come forward with allegations of witchcraft. Egged on by threats and rewards, people named names, and the nightmare began. Weisensteig, a community in the Western Holy Roman Empire, modern Germany, less than a century after Heinrich Kramer made his name in the Ravensburg trial, saw another demonic hailstorm that ruined their crops. When the locals realized that they faced a foodless winter, hysteria set in. A local nobleman named Count Ulrich von Helfenstein began to round up women in the nearby villages. While small villages are sometimes romanticized as harmonious idylls, people living in tight communities can still have serious problems with one another. Rivalries, betrayals, trades gone sour, and lingering hatreds could lead to neighbors hating one another enough to accuse each other of witchcraft. Local men, aided and led by court officials, dragged women into makeshift prisons and chained them up. Convinced that the mere 6 women arrested could not have acted alone, Helfenstein demanded more witches. He received them. Women arrested for witchcraft would be forced to disrobe before their male captors. They probed their body with long needles in search of evidence. Any wart, mole, or birthmark could be declared a mark from Satan. Yet that would not be enough to condemn a woman. Civil law required a confession gained by interrogation. During the interrogation, most witch hunters used torture. Women under torture named names simply to end their pain. As more and more witches were identified, abject hysteria set in, and people began to fling wild accusations at their neighbors, in part to deflect attention from themselves. And it's no accident that almost 80% of those accused of witchcraft were women. Assumptions of the time portrayed them as inherently weaker than men, and thus more likely to succumb to temptation. In Europe, Catholic and Protestant theologians tied the idea of women's weakness to Eve's temptation by the devil, as described in the Bible. Other women made themselves vulnerable by practicing herbal remedies that dated back to the pre-Christian era, more than enough to arouse suspicion among the almost exclusively male clergy, who also blamed women for leading men into temptation. While some wealthy heiresses faced accusation as a means for nefarious actors to secure their inheritances, most of the victims did not have means. By the end of the Weisensteig trials, over 60 women had died either from garroting or burning at the stake. The next great witch hunt erupted in Trier, located in modern West Germany, a city then in the supposedly Holy Roman Empire. In 1581, a man named Johann von Schönberg became Prince Bishop. He wished to demonstrate his piety and loyalty to the Jesuit order. To do so, he carried out a purge of Protestants, nonconformists, and witches. Schoenberg imported a swarm of trained accusers, notaries, jurors, and judges. Their sweep caught up rich and poor, male and female, Catholic and Protestant. Some of the victims included wealthy burghers, councillors, parish priests, and church deans. Mayors and sheriffs threw people into stone jails teeming with rats and damp. To extract confession, hunters used the thumbscrew. It is a simple vise, sometimes with protruding studs on the inside surfaces to inflict more pain. Officials placed victims' thumbs, fingers, or toes into the vise and slowly crushed them. Thumbscrews could twist until they shattered bones, leaving the victims with digits reduced to sacks of splintered bone. Torturers also used larger, heavier devices based on the same design called iron boots to crush victims' feet. If thumbscrews failed, authorities stretched victims on the rack. A rectangular wooden frame raised slightly above the ground, it included a roller at both ends. Officials tied or chained victims' ankles to one roller and the wrists to the other. As the interrogation progressed, a handle and ratchet attached to the top roller slowly retracted the chains or ropes, which slowly increased the strain on the prisoner's shoulders, hips, and knees. This caused pain comparable to what Christ endured on the cross. Ligaments and tendons began to pop one by one. After enough stretching, the victim might even hear their arm or leg bones snapped in two. And if that did not loosen their tongues, then tongs or pincers would loosen their toenails. Victims suffering thumbscrews and the rack named names, sometimes those who wronged them, other times anyone whose name came to mind. In search of these satanic cabals, authorities created them in the desperate confessions of prisoners who only wished to be allowed to die, which led to more arrests, more torture, and more execution. This only fanned the flames of hysteria, as people rushed to accuse one another before being accused themselves. Dietrich Flade, a local university rector, spoke in opposition to the murderous campaign. Strikingly, he criticized Malleus Maleficarum, arguing that it represented unsound thinking. The authorities addressed his concerns by arresting and torturing him until he confessed to using his position to protect witches. While Schoenberg's men strangled him, they still tied his corpse to the stake and burned him. In between 1587 and 1593, the horrifying witch hunt in Trier and the small towns around it claimed 384 lives, and those would be only the beginning. I hope that you found this informative. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.